Hey guys, it's a beautiful day. Let me show you the garden. It's looking so nice. My studio looking all beautiful in the sunshine. We're having a little bit of work done, as you can see. Hopefully going to extend the decking a bit. And we're going to have lots and lots of lovely plants and climbers and bee loving and butterfly loving plants there, so yeah, should look good. So today I'm going to show you how to make a wedging board, but because we're using plaster, clay and plaster should never mix, so I'm going to do it out in the garden in the sunshine. So you don't ever want your plaster to mix with your clay, because things like this can happen. Can you see? There's a tiny little hole there, and that's from a plaster blowout. My reclaim must have got contaminated. Yeah, you want to keep your plaster and your clay separate. So this is my plaster wedging board. I made it about 6 years ago now. It's 1 1/4 inches thick. That's about 4.5 centimeters. It measures 21 by 16 inches, which is about 55 by 40 centimeters. And you can see it's quite heavy. I find that my plaster wedging board is one of the most useful pieces of equipment in my studio. Its main use is for preparing my clay by wedging and kneading. Now I wanted an extra one in my studio to help me get through my reclaim. If you want to know how I recycle my clay, you can find out in this video. I'll link it underneath this video in the notes. A plasterboard like this one is also a really great place to work when hand building or constructing thrown pieces together. In this video, I'm going to go over which plaster to choose, the tools you're going to need, the method of how to mix your plaster and then how to make your board, and then cleaning up. You don't want to put any plaster down your sink. This really is an easy way to make your own plaster wedging board. First things first, which plaster do you need? There are loads of different types of plasters on the market, and it can be confusing to know which one is best to use for a plaster wedging board. Now the plaster you choose is important, as you want it to be a higher strength plaster, which normally comes at the cost of slightly lower absorbency. For things like molds, you want your plaster to be really absorbent, and it doesn't need to be quite as strong, but for this, it's got to be really tough. For instance, plaster of Paris is really absorbent, but it's too weak for this purpose and it will just break. The plaster I'm using today is called ceramicist, but you can also use Potter's Plaster number 1. If you can't find either one of these, then give your local pottery supply store a call, because they'll be able to advise you on which plaster is best for which purposes. It's unlikely you're going to find the right type of plaster at your DIY stores. The things you're going to need to make your plaster wedging board are a big flexible bucket. These are great because they can double up as a pourer. As a mould, I'm using one of these underbed storage boxes. This one is 19 inches by 15, and I'm going to want my plaster board to be 2 inches deep. You're going to want a measuring jug to measure out your water, a regular household sieve, a pair of gloves just to protect your skin from drying out, and a respirator. Any powder in your lungs is just not good for you. You'll also want some dish soap and a sponge. Oh yeah, and don't forget your plaster. How to make your wedging board. Firstly, I'm going to coat the inside of my container with dish soap, and this will help the plaster to release later on. Measuring out the amount of water I need, I'm going to fill up my flexible bucket. You'll need to measure the amount of water out according to the amount of plaster. I have 10 kilos of plaster, that's about 22 pounds. The mixing ratio for the plaster I'm using is 1.7 kilos to 1 litre of water. So I'm going to need 5.8 litres of water. Alexa, how many quarts is 5.8 litres? That's 5.1 imperial quarts. The water should be at room temperature. Then, wearing my respirator and my gloves, I'm going to sieve my plaster into the flexible container with the water. Now you always add plaster to water and not the other way around. You don't want to take too long over this. 5 minutes maximum. This is because the plaster is setting all the time it's in contact with the water. Set a timer on your phone just so you know how long things are taking. After a few minutes of using the sieve, I found it was taking too long, so I reverted to pouring the plaster into the bucket, as I was fearful it would begin to harden. You might want to use a larger mesh sieve, or just pour it in as I did here. It didn't seem to harm the final result. Now with a gloved hand, I'm going to move the plaster about, going from side to side. It's best to use your hands for this. A drill mixer will introduce too much air. This is quite hard work, as there is a lot of plaster to incorporate into the water. You want to try and work out all the lumps of plaster that you can find with your hands. You should aim for this to take no longer than 3 minutes. When you see that your finger can start to leave behind a mark on the surface of the plaster, it's ready to pour. And you want to do this quickly but gently into your container. Now knock your container against the floor. This will help to release air bubbles up to the surface. You can also spray the surface with rubbing alcohol. This will help to eliminate air bubbles. As you can see, the plaster starts hardening very, very quickly, and you can already see it starting to pull away from the edge. And in a day or so, that'll be ready to flip out. I'm going to put it up high in my studio just to dry out overnight. Now for the cleanup. As with clay and glazed sediment, you don't want plaster going down your drains, as it will eventually clog them up. So use dry newspaper to wipe out the inside of your bucket and your container. And then use a wet paper towel to get rid of any residue. Put the newspaper and the towels straight into the bin. Well, I think I can safely say goodbye to those gloves. Now my wedging board is hard enough to turn out. So I'm going to get a cushion or a pillow or something soft to turn it out onto so I don't accidentally crack it. I'm going to lightly tap it all around the outside with my hand. If it doesn't easily release, I'm going to revert to a hammer, but I'm going to be very gentle and just tap it around the outside edges. There she blows! Now whilst the plaster is still soft, I'm going to use a craft knife to tidy up any scraggy edges. Now I'm going to put it somewhere safe in my studio to dry out for about 3 weeks. It takes a while for the plaster to be fully cured and to get to its maximum strength. You're going to have to be patient for this bit, but it will be worth doing because you'll only have to make this once and you're going to use it for years to come. Well, I hope that was helpful, guys. If you have any questions at all, or if you need any help with anything, then drop me a DM on Patreon or pop me a comment underneath the video. I'm so happy to help. Have a lovely weekend and I'll see you soon.